Well, welcome everyone. This is Kylan Hunt with Grow Guru, and with us today we have Brad Forkner and we have David Sloan. And our primary discussion today is going to be on how do we prepare to pollinate. So we're going to be thinking about watching our root systems develop after we plant the seed all the way up to that tassel point. We're going to be thinking about corn, and you can look at it from a soybean perspective, an edible bean perspective, specialty crops. Everything has its cycle, right? We're going to take a look at corn in this session. We're going to be talking a lot about corn. And to do that, though, I think we're going to kick off with Brad Forkner. And Brad, let's just ask you a little bit as we're getting ready to prepare for planting. I mean, this is a critical time. What are some things that we should really be thinking about, knowing that, let's just say next week we're going to drop a seed in the ground? What do we want to be thinking about when that seed goes in to give us a really strong start?
I always go back and think about one of our forefathers, Abraham Lincoln, when he said, if I've got an hour to chop down a tree, I'm going to spend 45 minutes getting that axe sharp, making sure that everything's ready to go. So, we just had a meeting here last Monday night, and the guy talked about how many disc blade openers that he went through, like 168 of them, to find 32 that ran true for the front of his planter. Then, as he started finding them, the second thing he did was put a mic on the actual blade on the edge, because if there was a variance in the thickness on the edge, now we're also going to be making some W's in the bottom of that furrow. And if we knock a little bit of soil in on the backside of dropping that soil, the seed exactly where we want it, not as big a deal. But if we drop soil in there on the front end of it, now we start messing with our depth, and things. Since we're talking water today, let's think about what happened last fall. We got corn following beans. We got a 25-foot spread on a wider than that corn head. So we have an even layer of residue out there? How are we breaking it down? Because that is going to affect two things. What is that soil temperature as we run the row cleaners? What is that moisture, depending on whether or not the sun's pulled extra of it out? Are we sitting there with extra soil or extra moisture under the residue that's left? Those kinds of things. And as we then also think about the planter side of it, before we talk the moisture side of it, are we setting up our own stop signs? Have we put a big pool of phosphorus out here, for example? That young corn rat gets over there and thinks, I found a sugar daddy. I'm set. And so he quits going out and starts sending those roots out to find the next meal. When that meal hits and it's gone, now he's in trouble. We do a little bit of those kinds of things, sometimes with an excess amount of nitrogen that's out there at one time. So we don't want to create our own stop signs out there. We don't want to go out there with the sidewall compactions, and because once we have uneven emergence, and these guys are down to where they don't want them more than 6 hours apart, much less 2 or 3 days apart. Anytime that corn plant beside you doesn't come up the same time or within 6 hours, we're all already determining that we're going to have a shorter size ear. Is it going to be 2/3 of an ear, a half an ear, a third of an ear? We already know that by the third leaf out there on the corn, we have set up determination by the amount of phosphorus for how many rows we can handle. We can put more phosphorus out later, but we have already missed. It's kind of like I got a 0 on the midterm. That's going to kind of get me in a bad shape. However, I work for the final. I'm just never quite going to get back there where I wanted to be. So as we go through these things, I'm going to watch, and I may interject once in a while and say, this is the lesson I learned from what we're saying here on the water.
Hmm. Very good. Very good. Well, let's turn it over then to David Sloan. David is going to share with us a few things about what to look for when we're going from the planting season to the pollination period. What are some things that we can look for? So, David, let's turn it over to you and let you take this away for us.
The first thing I want to do is just do a little recap on what it is that we're looking at here. So we've got a capacitance sensor, or a series of capacitance sensors. So we've got a probe that goes in the ground, and that's got sensors at different depths. And they're measuring continuously. So we get this, when I say continuously, every 30 minutes, day and night, and transmitting it back to the internet live. And so we're not the only ones doing that. That's been a well-established technology. But just for those of you who haven't been exposed to it, what you get when you do have a continuous data stream is the ability to watch the plants drink. And so this is so cool because you can actually see when moisture is applied, whether it's rainfall or irrigation, the soil goes up, soil moisture goes up, and then we can see this characteristic stair stepping. So during the day, the plant uses moisture, and so it takes it out of the soil. At night it rests, and during the day it takes moisture out of the soil, and so on and so forth. So we can actually see what's going on, and we can watch the crop drink. And we really, from this, we can know how our plants are responding to soil moisture. And so it's not just a soil moisture probe. This is the heartbeat of the crop. And that's the most important thing. It's actually really, really cool, because if you get a short, or conditions are cool, cloudy, whatever, you'll get a small step. If the conditions pick up, you'll get a bigger step. In fact, let's just flip over here to some live data. Here we are at the start of the season, and these stair steps are starting to get bigger. And there's been water applied, but these steps are getting larger and larger and larger. And that's the really cool thing. We can peel back and look at the whole season now and see we've got every single day mapped out across this season. So we can look at what's been going on inside the plant at a physiological level and really start to understand what's going on. You'll also see that we're going a little deeper, a little deeper, a little deeper each time. And so I'll cover that in some more detail as we go through this. But really, you can start to see the size of those steps. And through this period here, the steps are very large. And so that's also corresponds probably with tassel. And so that's that period that we're talking about, is setting that crop up. And not only can we look at it with all of the sensors, so this is kind of like a gas gauge scenario, we can drill down and we can look at that with each individual sensor. So this looks like a mess. I'm just going to use this little plus over here. And what I'm doing is I'm taking the top sensor and putting it at the top of the graph, and the bottom sensor at the bottom of the graph. So remember, this is a permanent probe. It's buried so that we can actually farm over it. And so the first sensor is at 12 inches. Then the green line is 16, then 24, 32, 40, and 48 inches. So we're actually got this whole root zone mapped down for every day of the growing season. So it is it's really, really valuable, because obviously during the season, as each day appears, we can see what's going on. We've also got this this data set that we can drill down and look backwards into and really understand if we get a yield and we look at the ears and we see there's been some tipping back or things like that, we can actually see how we got to that point. We can see what the plant was doing on that day or during that week of the season, and why we got what we got, so we can really improve. And the other thing is, with this kind of technology, not only because we don't take it out, we can learn across from one season to the next. And this is so important because we didn't even know that we were full in that first season. And there's a lot of people out there using soil moisture sensors. Thing is, you have to plant the crop for a traditional sensor that you install just for the season and then pull it out. You have to plant the crop, get a stand, and then go run around like a crazy thing, putting them in. And then come harvest time, you've got to pull all the equipment out again. So you're actually missing what happens over the winter and leading into the next season. So, Brad, did you have any comments you wanted to make on this at this time?
Yeah, so in here, we hear things, especially among the strip till and the no-till people, that over time, that our fertility stratifies. And so as I know where I'm going up and down every day, where my roots exactly are, as I've done my soil test, I can go down and check those stratifications. Where are we at? What are they into? What can I supplement with? After I get multi-year data on here, I can also go back there and say, we're going into this year pretty short of moisture, and I need to have something on the corn side that pollinates early, has an early fill period or a long fill period to catch all the moisture that I can, because if I wait and pollinate late and start drawing my moisture early, I can pretty well tell that I'm going to run out. I can use this to see where my profile is to aid in my marketing. Am I in good shape? And if I'm in good shape or I know I have enough water, and I have looked back at last year and I had some tip back, and it started on, let's say it started on August the 15th. I know this year I cannot let my water level get as low prior to August 15th as I did last year. And so this is a marketing tool. This is a supplement, a nutritional supplementation time that I can work on. And, just call either one of us and ask exactly those questions. And we're not going to sit here and spend a ton of time on them on this, but what we're trying to do here is to stimulate thoughts so that you can take your individual situation, understand where you are, and then find out how we can help you address it through hybrid selection, through nutrition, and for sure through the water if you've got some irrigation. And if we don't have water and we know we're going to run out, then we can have a better decision on, is this the time to, to back off our risk?
I was just going to pan back to another season. So that was a corn crop in 2019. And then we got some winter moisture over the this time of year during, I guess, the late winter, early spring, coming into 2020. That was a cotton crop. And then we're back into a corn crop again. And so what we can do here is take a little look. If I drill down, we can also see this corn crop was growing at a lower moisture content than here. They managed to get it wet and then keep it pretty wet. So if we go to the moisture graph, and I use the plus again a couple of times here, we can start to see that the lower part of the root zone here, roots were there, but there wasn't really much water going in down there. Whereas you look at the corn crop over here, and the roots are there, and we're getting a lot of usage. So we're just bringing more roots into play. And this is the really cool thing, is this is a valid comparison because the probe hasn't moved. It's the same probe in the same part of the field. Now, with the planting, they're on 30-inch centers. And so we'll position the probe 7.5 inches off the road, because then they'll split the middles the next year and then back again. And we'll probably actually find that these corn crops are planted right over the same line anyway. But that's what we would do with when we've got guidance. It's just basically position the probe so we flip-flop either side, and it's the same distance. So we should be valid that way. But yeah,
this will also tell us, as we're working on soil health and as we're working on soil permeability, if I'm doing some things that I'm spending money on to try and enhance the, shrink the size of the clay colloid, get more channels open so that my air and my water, and we don't always talk about it. We just say air, oxygen gets down there. And so I can measure year to year, am I doing a better job getting that water farther down?
And the interesting thing here is that there was no winter moisture. This was all irrigation to get them full again. And so we'll take a little deeper dive on watching the soil wet up. But the key thing, if I go back to my summary graph, is that we know now. We didn't know in that first year. So if I'm putting my probe in, taking it out, putting it in, taking it out, I might make this mistake where all I have is what I see. But now that I've left the probe in, I can see, wow, this is where I need to be. This is where I need to get my soil moisture so that I can set up a good yield potential. And so if you're if you don't have irrigation, if you're rain fed, this is also really crucial in knowing that, what's my outlook for this season? Am I full? Am I not full? So I'm going to adjust my sowing rate, my fertilizer rates in line with my yield expectation. So, once you've got a few seasons under your belt, gives you extremely good, confidence, high confidence on where I need to be and what's the outcome going to be.
So I just want to touch base on what both of you guys just said in the last 2 or 3 minutes. Brad, you talked about increasing, making the investment and increasing your holding capacity. If you're going to increase your ability to hold water, store water, have more oxygen, improve that soil profile, that's huge. And we're going to be able to start tracking and monitoring that. Then David, like you mentioned, in a scenario where you have the ability to irrigate, we can make sure we're full, start the way nature intended it. If we combine those two systems together, there's a lot of power there. And if we have that irrigation capacity, that's huge. But even if we don't have the irrigation opportunity, making sure that soil profile is as healthy as it can be to hold as much water as possible with its oxygen ratio, that's huge. I think what you guys just talked on, if that became our whole focus for 4 years, we're going to increase profits substantially. Would you guys agree?
And
From
it's
our ability to go in and do our marketing and have a better understanding that market's up, can I sell another 10% of the crop?
Absolutely.
and what I see, because what we've learned in this part of the world, which happened to be the Texas Panhandle, is you need to slow down. To get the water to penetrate deeply, you need to slow down. But the trouble is, you've then got to get the water to penetrate deeply, and that's all about soil structure. And so that really comes down to having those pathways for water to enter and having the microbial activity at a level where it's breaking down the corn roots, so that you've got pathways for water to access, so that you've got earthworms. All of that is so important to help you take in, these large amounts of water. And so soil health is so huge here. It's not just about, hey, I want to put on, slow down my pivot so I can irrigate deeply. You've got to have the soil that can take it. And I'm going to pan back here to now. Here we are. We've got 2019, 2020, 21, 22, 23. You know what? I'm already set for 24. And I can look into the future now. We can sit there over the winter. We can look back and drill down through the data. This was a corn, cotton, corn, cotton, corn. Now we're into cotton again. So this, we're expecting to basically in season put more water on the companion crop, which is the corn. So in season, I can put less water on the cotton because it's going to mine that soil moisture like it's done the previous two cycles here. That's built in. But then I've also got to get it back again. So you can see back here in 2020, the cotton took water out to about this point. In 2022, it went all the way down to here. It was just a warmer season and longer finish. They run out of heat when you're growing it at 3,500 feet. So, but this
one more interjection too, because of the area you're talking about, we have those slower gallon per minute wells. We have to know when to run them.
Sure. So this is part of the secret sauce is in season. You can put more water on the corn and less on the cotton. So you get that companion sort of side of things. And then out of season, you can start to, at this time of year, like literally the pivots will start running. If we look here to get back, that was March, middle of March, to start to wet the soil back up again. And that might sound crazy to most people. Why are you doing so much irrigation? Because if you didn't, look what the outcome would be. You needed to get some moisture back in there. Now, luckily, they got some rain in May and June to really top it up, but that got us back to where we knew was full. So, but I'm already set off and running here, so I've got a roadmap to follow coming into 2024. And over the course of time, nature, as you can see just here, the differences between the cotton crops really obvious. There are differences between the corn crops as well, and we can be really confident that we're going to get the outcome that we want. And over time, we can make changes and see those changes actually in the data and have valid comparisons from season to season. So I just talked about preparing the soil, and what does that look like? So remember that we've got these sensors in that array, like in the tube going down in the soil. And in this case, it's fully buried, so we farm straight over it. This was a no-till field, so we've got 4 inches of clear space, which puts the first sensor at 8 inches down. So you can see here the sensor depth's going down to 44 inches. And what's really cool is we can watch those wetting events. So that first one, the blue line steps up and the green line steps up, and this red line, which is 20 inches down, is just slowly soaking over time. That water is down, just kind of soaking down. It's wicking towards the dry soil. And then we have another event, which you can see that the blue line doesn't go up much because it's pretty full, and that water is running through wet soil. Same with the green. So now it's stepping up pretty sharply. Rather than a slow soak, it's now actually a wetting front that's hit it. And we've got that slow soak happening down there at 28 inches. You get to the next event, we can see that these are all stepping up now, but the upper layers are not really moving much. it's pushing down to the gray line at 36, and then the next event pushes through to the 44-inch layer, and then the final one here it's just really topping things off, but it's pretty wet now. And so once you know what to look for, this is an X-ray. It's the equivalent of what an X-ray is to medicine. This is really the X-ray of your root system. The root zone, I should say, because that top 3 or 4 feet or 5 feet, depending on how deep we bury the probe, we can see that soil wetting up. We can see it, us preparing for planting, and you can also mess around with your irrigation rates. Is putting on 1 inch sort of better than putting on a 2-inch pass or a 3-inch pass? I had one farmer that I know that just experimented. He tried to put on 6 inches at one time, and his neighbors were telling him that his pivot was stuck. And he said, well, no, it's just a trial that I'm running to see what's the best way of filling the profile. This is a different kind of probe. There are 9 sensors on this one. And so it's actually a pretty sandy soil. And so the bottom here is 34 inches. But we can actually see the soil wet up, but then we can also see when it's wet, we can see the water moving through the bottom. And so that's the wetting up. But when we get these blips down low, that's that wetting front actually hitting the bottom sensor. In this case, it was too much. So we can see the soil wet up, but we can also see when we're losing water out the bottom. The next thing I wanted to talk about in terms of preparation, cover crops are, in my view, I'm a big supporter of cover crops, but the jury's always been out as to, hey, am I robbing my summer crop of moisture? Like, what's going on here? So in this situation, we've got I actually think it was a wheat crop, but we can see when it breaks dormancy. So if this was your cover, we can see it's bouncing around over the winter because you get a little bit of heat effect, heating and cooling, and so on. The ground might even freeze, not in this situation, but you can see that too. But what's really, really clear is we can see when that stepping starts, and you can see when this crop breaks dormancy. And so if this did happen to be a cover crop, you can go out there and hit it with herbicide and go and terminate it. So Brad, did you have some comments you wanted to make?
Yeah, what I want to talk about in this portion of it is if we are people that have always had questions or trying to understand exactly how does the cover crop work with my residue management, and can I do both at the same time? If we're using a spore former set of biology to do our residue management, they only work on dead material. So when this stuff breaks loose, we can go out there and we can now start turning last year's residue into a slow release fertility program and not do any harm at all to our cover crop, whether we're using it to keep biology alive, or we're using it to fix nitrogen, or whether we're using it for weed suppression when we bend it over. I can do both at the same time without harming either one of them.
Now I just wanted to talk about, so we're still in that phase where we're setting up our crop. And so what we can look at here is we've got those same sensors going down. They're sorted out, so the top sensor is at the top of the graph and the bottom sensor is at the bottom of the graph. And what we can see when they're dead flat, so we're at a stage where this crop is not actually, it hasn't established itself, it hasn't set a root system. So these lines are flat, but we can see when that stepping occurs. And so we know with confidence when roots get to certain depths. And so this is so important because how I irrigate directly affects how deep the roots are. And it reminds me of what you said earlier, Brad, about having a sugar daddy, right? You were talking about nutrition.
Yeah.
You can have a sugar daddy with water as well, and just create a lazy plant. If you start early and irrigate often, you'll see this very clearly that you don't have deep roots. So
also, as we watch those roots go down, one of the things we have discussed, before we started the Zoom here was, is that going to allow us to start doing zone measurement on fertility that's there? How does that change as we go down? Can we continue to get biology down there or something else that is going to keep breaking some of that loose? And if we know we've got a plow pan down there, and we know we're getting ready to maybe let's say we're going to hit some old herbicides or some old salts left out of the fertilizers, old insecticides. We don't always talk about plant back restrictions, but when I've got any kind of a chemical out there, that getting that half-life done is dependent on time, temperature, and moisture. And so if we've had to go out there a little bit late, we can go in there with some of this pre-irrigation, and we can also dilute and speed up breaking down the half-life on some of that, so that it is going to be less of a question of what's going to happen when my roots hit whatever's left out of that residue. Another tool that we have, because we know where the roots and the moisture levels are.
So it's interesting because I'll point something out here, but what we've got in this data set is we can actually watch the roots going down. This plant is chasing moisture. And so you can see with those circles, like what we're looking at is when those stair steps are maximized. So it goes from being flat to large steps to then slowing down again. And that's the plant actually using moisture at different depths. And you can, when I circle it like that, see really, really obviously that plant is chasing moisture. Now, what that means is you're kind of paving the road that you're driving on. And if the conditions are mild enough, you might say, hey, I'm just going to let the plant do what it wants to do and keep growing roots because it can keep up with its demand at that time. But if you can look ahead and say, hey, this weather is going to warm up, my demand is going to increase and I'm not going to be able to keep up, then time to irrigate if you're an irrigation farmer. And so, yeah, you really can decide, whether I just hold off, and it might only be a couple of days, just to give it that nudge to go deeper, or whether I need to go now with my irrigation because otherwise it's just not going to keep up. And that's actually seen I didn't make the slide, but if you looked at all of these added together, you can actually see, is my summary graph, are those stair steps uniform and even, or is they starting to slow down? But what's pretty interesting here is that this crop has actually got really active late. And yes, it might be chasing some moisture, but it might also be chasing some nutrition down there. So, and that's pretty deep, but it's, interesting that it got very active, quite late in the piece.
So what you just said right there, it might be chasing nutrition at a certain time. Plants are intelligent. They're an intelligent element, and they will seek out what they need. And I've noticed that at times where, we get deeper roots, but sometimes it won't be active until we go through that grain fill period. And I truly believe that there's nutritional elements deeper in that profile. And there's another element that I believe a plant is trying to accomplish, which is oxygenation. I really think the plants are trying to, find that airspace. I mean, they're breathing, they're going through an immense amount of work as they fill that ear. And we'll talk a little bit more about that next week. But that's where I see that we have a lot of activity at different layers. I think those plants are chasing nutrition, and it's our job to make sure that nutrition's available. That's what we have to be able to do.
And you did point out to me in these major rain events that we are pushing some oxygen down. That's why the water sometimes is slower to penetrate. But you just also told me that it's not wrong to have oxygen clear down there when we need it in case we're wet above it.
I once again, I didn't queue it up for this seminar, but I've seen lots of examples of trapped air getting pushed down. So where all these sensors might jump up because the water is hit, you'll get one lower down that actually drops the other way, and it's lowered because the trapped air is getting pushed down through the soil. This is the same slide, just what I was looking for with these inflection points. So we can see where we go from being like large stair steps to smaller stair steps. It's an inflection point, and that, we go down 2 layers, and we can actually see, sort of down here at 28 inches, that's when it starts to increase. So you can start to look for these inflection points where one slows down and then literally one speeds up. So it's there's a lot of art to this. It's not just science. You can actually use some literally hold a piece of paper on the screen and see, is it straight, or are we starting to bend one way or the other? So let's talk about rainfall. So I've been talking about irrigation the whole time, and to be honest, this is still an irrigated field. But what I'm looking at here is how deep the water goes. And so we can see, just highlighted some events here, but if I look at this third circled one, we can see the orange line steps up, but the gray line doesn't. So I know how deep the water has penetrated. But then if we look at this a different way and we say, okay, for the blue line at 12 inches, I know what my full point is. And then I can see, okay, water has come on, but did it wet it up? In this case, it's probably only got it half full at that level. And this next event, you can see that it's probably only got it a third full at that level. And so you can see, relatively speaking, how full or empty each individual level is. So that's what we do when we look at in the software. We treat each line separately and then pull them all back together again to look at the overall availability. So not only can I see how much is available, but I can see where it's available, and then we'll pull that into actually pictures and show you a little graph that's really easy to understand. So you don't have to read the big graph; you can just see it at a summary level. So this is an interesting one. We've got two fields that were side by side, and this truly is rain-fed. And so what's going on here when we see, okay, there's rain that's come on, but it looks different. And I need to draw your eye to the fact that that first event actually had pretty much half filled the soil, but it didn't even register on this other field. And it's the same soil type, the same crop, happened to be soybeans, and they're literally side by side. They were planted on the same day with the same equipment. What's going on? This next event on the bottom side here, that soil's now full. On the top side here, we're only getting it back to about a third full, or even a quarter of where it started. And so the third event, we're starting to wet the soil up now, where it's got to this point, and by the fourth rainfall event, now we're full on the top side, where it only took 2 on the bottom side. So what's the difference? Well, these actually both had tile drains under them. This is rain-fed field in Illinois, and on the bottom there was a gate structure to hold the water back. And so we can actually see, it's kind of, if you think of it like a potted plant, we're actually blocking off the bottom of the pot, so it fills up much more quickly, whereas the soybeans had actually taken a lot of this water out of the soil, dried it out, and presumably cracked it and over the top of the drains. So the water ran down the cracks and out the drains, and it wasn't until the second rainfall that it started to actually soak back in, because now the soil had swollen up around the drains. So yeah, okay, it's a really nice comparison of what happens with holding water back, but the idea here is that, hey, what's happening in my soil? If I've got not mechanical structures, but biology, is this affecting my ability to wet the soil back up? Or it may be chemistry. It may be the water quality going onto the soils that we've got some issues. So
I mean, this is one of the things we talk about on the Precision Planting Roadshow. If we're trying to figure out how many years it's going to take us to pay for tile, and we look at a 60-foot tile, 30-foot tile, 15-foot tile, and maybe it's going to take us, 9, 10, 11 years for a payback on this. One of the things that Jason points out is that gate is a very minimal investment. And so now we're not just talking about drain tiles, we're talking about water management tiles, which is exactly what you're showing here.
That's another thing too. Not only are you losing water out the drains, but you can be taking a lot of nutrition as well. So,
and if you can capture this, if you can not be moisture deficit by just shutting that gate, you might take your 11-year payout back to a 7.
Where I wanted to go next was just talk about, remember we're talking about the setup of the crop, okay? And how do we get ready for planting, and how do we actually grow in that root system in such a way that we're going to make money out of it? And so I just wanted to pull back and say, okay, let's just look at the math involved here. And so yield is purely how many grains you've got and how large are they. And then there may be some quality aspects. So if I'm growing wheat, looking at the protein quality content, or certainly with malting barley, if you've got too high a protein, then you're going to get a severe penalty. So, what is the take home here is that all of this is affected by moisture, by access to moisture. And so it may be access to moisture in the soil, or it may be access to irrigation, whatever it is, that plant needs moisture. And that access to moisture has the single biggest impact on yield and quality. So let's break this down. If we look at corn, and we look at, this is out of a textbook where we've got percent yield reduction versus different stress. So percent yield reduction versus stress at different times in the season. It's roughly equivalent to a water use curve, but the take-home message here is don't let it stress during that pollination phase. And if I'm an irrigator, then I might have a problem. In fact, well, there's certainly a lot of people out there that can keep up with the corn crop, but most can't, especially in the Midwest, and especially the further west you go, or Southwest, you just can't keep up with what that crop needs. And so the amount you're going to run into a deficit, and so you've got to get the water from somewhere. And if you can't get it out of the sky, which you can't guarantee that, then you've got to get it out of the soil. So, and the amount of water you've got really dictates, what the deficit will be. I just threw this graph in here, this chart, so that people can have it for reference. But I highlighted, it at 4 gallons per acre per minute, even at 100% efficiency, we're still only 21 hundredths a day that we can apply. And let's face it, we're not irrigating at 100% efficiency. So you can use this for reference to say, okay, how many gallons per acre do I need to keep up with my crop? And it may mean that you've got a huge deficit. I can't keep up, so therefore I'm going to not grow as much. I'm going to cut my deficit down by just cutting, instead of planting 120 acres on this pivot, maybe I'll plant half of it, plant 60, or maybe I'll plant 80 or 100, just to get my application at a level where I can keep up and just manage the deficit. So that aside, let's just go back to the original ability to supply water. If I'm going to give myself the best opportunity, then the obvious thing is, hey, let's put water in at a time when I can put more on than what the plant's using. So early season. Great. That is exactly right. The trouble is, if you do that the wrong way, then you're going to damage your ability to get it out later. How so? If I start early and irrigate often, my plant gets lazy. And just as that corn plant is thinking, oh, I need to go and grow some roots and get some more water, the pivot comes over. And so it doesn't need to do that. And it just sits there with a false sense of security until the pivot can't keep up anymore. And then you're in a world of hurt. And so that often happens if you just get a cool, wet season early and then you get a hot, dry season later. That same thing can happen. So what you need to do, I'm not telling anyone to stop irrigating, although you may be able to. It's really a case of just slowing down. And then if you run it a little slower, then it's a longer time between drinks. The plant gets a little thirsty and it starts to put its roots deeper. And when you are running slower, you're putting on more water. So now you can fill the soil back up again. And it made one change, just pivot speed, putting on exactly the same volume of water. I guarantee you'll get a better result if you can keep that water on target. And so that's where soil structure, that's where cover crops, that's where having the ability to infiltrate water is so critical. And so it's not only, hey, just slow down, it's slow down and get the water into the soil. And so people have tried a lot of different things. It's where flipping the pads and running in bubble mode is very popular in that Texas Panhandle, which is a region I'm very familiar with. Dragging drip hoses with dragon line, things like that, really help you get that water into the soil in strips, but it will get it onto the soil surface and help it, really wick down. But in partner to that, people have been working really, really hard on infiltration. The infiltration.
So, we'll have some guys that they'll run a crop rotation to where they're going to say, we're going to do maybe wheat for silage. Next year, we're going to do corn for silage, or corn and then wheat. And if we've got one of those 300 gallon per minute wells, maybe on the 4th year, we're going to shut that thing completely off, let the aquifer feed some of the different ones, let naturally come in there what we do, and then bring that one back in there for like our watermelons or something, that we're a little more cautious on carryover diseases, and figuring out what is the best use of water, what is the best use of allocating it to make the most money on the ground we are going to farm this year, and then getting that natural time to come in there. Same thing would happen with pumpkins up here in this area east of Peoria, where 90% of the pumpkins in the United States are raised. we have a natural, we won't plant back there for 3 years just to be sure there's no disease carryover. So we can actually use a lack of water or covering that half pivot or whatever to get some of these other isolation times that we kind of really need anyway. Not
Yeah.
to ever tell somebody that has plenty of water not to farm, but you can use that mindset, and then you're not taking the loss that you would anticipate because you needed that time anyway.
Yeah, it's always fascinating as I move around the country to just how vastly different the conditions are, and how what works in one environment doesn't work in another environment just simply because they're different environments. So, what I'm trying to highlight here is that in this region, they've been able to make a big difference by just simply slowing down and creating a larger root system. Because really,
Yep.
what we're trying to do here is bend this water availability curve so that we can actually, if you're running slower, you may start 2 days later, you may end up saving a turn because you get a shower or something like that. If you've got a bigger root system, then you can get more water out at the end of the season. So if you get some rainfall, you're going to get full benefit from it. But really, what we're doing is we're trying to crib or tilt the board in our favor by having a bigger root system, pure and simply, so that we can access more stored moisture at a time when you need it. And so it's there, let's use it. And I've seen a lot of people get this wrong, where they got big wells, they start early, they water often, and you get to the end of the season and they say, hey, I can shut down, not knowing that they don't have the roots, that they've actually only grown a 20-inch root system. And so the water's in the soil, but you just can't get it out again. And so in that scenario, you have to finish the way you started, and you've got to keep watering all the way to the end. So by watering more, you have to water more, and you're caught in that paradigm. But at least if you are watching what's going on and you are in that scenario, you can say, okay, I need to keep going, because you have a shallow root system. But that's a lesson to say, hey, I'm not going to let that happen again. I'm going to change, and I'm going to advance my whole farming practice. And I'm going to
Something that's going to come into play as we get more into these carbon intensity scores and some of these things, if we can slow down, make one less pivot, that's going to go back to fuel economy, which is going to increase your carbon intensity score, or the demand you put on those kinds of things, and your payment then on the backside is going to start going up based on you being conservative minded, even on the amount of fossil fuels and things that we're using to turn those irrigators and pump out water.
Yeah, that's a great point. So finally, I just wanted to show you, what does this look like? Really, what we're trying to do here is just keep up with that crop. So the green zone, we call that the optimum band. I'm trying to keep my moisture, the availability to the crop, reasonably high. But what happens at the start is that this goes down because we're growing in a root system. So the roots go down, they can access more moisture. So think of this green band is how big is my pot, if this was a potted plant. And then I'm trying to keep it watered. But then I also, at the back end, want to dry it down for harvest. And I know that's for another discussion. We're really focused on what happens in the front end of the season. But really, that's what we've got, is this roadmap to follow.
Perfect. Yeah, that roadmap is huge. I think that's a big part of it, guys. So I think it's about time to wrap up. We've done a lot here. We've shown a lot. We've looked at a lot. We've taken in a lot. There's a lot for us to absorb here. So I think, yeah, let's wrap this up. From each one of you, David, let's have you go first. What's your thoughts and wrap up as we think about going from planting to preparing to pollinate, that period? What are your final thoughts, and kind of give a golden nugget for people to think into, to take away?
Well, it's pretty simple. You've got to get the water in the soil, number one. And number two, you've got to have the roots to get it out again. And you're growing that root system in every year. So every year it's going to depend on the conditions. And so nature's always going to try and throw you, a curveball. So, if it does start out cool and wet, you got to not irrigate. Just don't do it because, hey, this is the time I always start. It's just do what the plant needs. And so if you can watch and learn from the plant, like flip this on its head, excuse me, and let the plant guide you as to what you need to do rather than the other way around, because that's the challenge. So yeah, fill the soil up because the roots need to grow into wet soil, and then do whatever you can to get a root system that can pull it all out. And I do hear people say, hey, I might get behind. So we've got to work that into the schedule as well. And that might be a topic for another day with companion planting. So I can take water from one crop, put it on another at a certain time of the year.
Yeah, that's right.
So
Brad, what about you? What are your-
David just turned his way onto my team because he said, that looking to feed the nutrition that we need. Too many of us are still going out there and saying to raise whatever bushel of corn or whatever, our target is. We're going to throw this much out there without going back and checking, do we really need it? And the ROI that I try and bring in there says, let's know what's out there. Let's figure out what's in the plant. Let's know how much more we need. And that is all driven by water. Do I have enough water? How's the water moving, or how's the water not moving? So if I'm not moving nitrogen, I'm not moving potassium, I'm not moving selenium, I got a chance to go back at there and run that through the leaf structure. That's where some of these new nitrogen fixers come in. If I'm not moving water, how else can I do it? And it just opens up, more fun things to learn, play with. In each one of those, how does that affect my bottom line? What's the return on investment? That's our whole game.
Absolutely.
Put the plant
Absolutely.
right in the middle of it, and you can't go wrong. It's plant-driven farming.
Yeah, I think, David, you mentioned it, the heartbeat of the plant. If we can really learn to listen and watch and pay attention to the heartbeat of the plant, which is, it's below the surface. I'll close with this. When I was 24 years old, I had cancer, but on the outside, I look good. I'm 24 years old. I was still very, very healthy, physically from a physical image perspective. I looked good. I felt good. It was hard for me to even grasp that I had cancer. But when you look below the surface, things were not healthy. I was not healthy below the surface. And that has really driven my story in agriculture. When we look below the surface, we begin to see things, identify things that are going to give us future problems, or identify things that we need to fix right now. And that's really the story. The plant that we see above the ground is a direct effect of what is happening below the ground. The below the ground is the cause. The plant that we see is the effect. And if we can really focus on the causes that are creating the plants that we want, we will get better. We will get better, and we will learn how to be very, very profitable as we move forward. So with that being said, I do want to thank you guys for participating in this with us again. Thank you for your wisdom and your knowledge that you share with this audience. And we look forward to next week when we're going to talk more about that period. It's a very short period, actually, where we go from that tassel period through pollination. And there's several things that we want to manage in there, right? We want to make sure we prepared well for pollination so that there's no stress taking place there. So we want to talk about what does it look like to have a stress-free pollination as much as possible. And there's a lot of environmental things outside of our control. But here again, I think we need to track that so that we can, again, predict how is that impacting our markets? How is that going to impact us at harvest? So if we can see what's happening during pollination and do our best to pollinate for profit, we're going to find out that there's some things we can definitely do and watch during that period. Would you guys agree?
Agree.
Sure.
All right. We'll see everyone here next week. Thank you for taking a few minutes to watch this recording. We look forward to serving you in the future. God bless, my friends. Make it awesome.